I will need to share the screen so I can.
Yeah, sorry. Now it's coming. Okay, I enable you.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate everyone in attendance here. And we wanted to talk about more of a position statement and a opportunity for future research in K-12 education here in the United States, especially, and with utilizing the cross-cutting concepts to design effective science, sense-making experiences and scaffolding scientific knowledge, which I'm working with my colleague, Dr. Brett Criswell here at Westchester University in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania here in the United States. So I just wanted to talk about what are these things called the cross-cutting concepts and how can they be used to design effective learning experiences? How can we help students use them in exploring scientific phenomenon? And that's also working with not just K-12 students, but also students at the university setting, especially pre-service teachers and teachers, practicing teachers who are new to the cross-cutting concepts and using them. How do we help them integrate them into their teaching? And then what is the plan for research with the cross-cutting concepts? What can we get out of them? One thing about the cross-cutting concepts as they relate to what the National Research Council, they provide students with connections and intellectual tools that are related across different disciplinary content areas and can enrich the application of practice and understanding of core ideas. That's a fair amount of saying that they are a part of the three twisted strands of rope to make a big, thicker rope. And this is when we talk about three-dimensional teaching and learning, that rope with all three strands is the performance expectation, where we expect our students, the knowledge we expect our students to have, or the skills we expect our students to gain by the end of a unit or end of a lesson. And those three strands represent the core ideas, the actual factual scientific concepts, key concepts of that particular, if it's a standard. The practices of doing science, what we sometimes call the science process skills, things like measuring, observing, developing hypotheses, working with variables, interpreting and analyzing data, using and creating models, things like that. And then this third strand, the cross-cutting concept. And just like storybooks have themes or may have a moral of a story, as we often might say, the cross-cutting concept is the theme of the lesson and an avenue by which we can bring our students to the destination of our lesson. If it's not the three parts of a twist of rope, then it could be the frame. How do we frame our lessons, much like how we frame doing research with a conceptual or a theoretical framework? And it's for us to link those experiences in our curricula and develop a lens, have our students use the lens for our students to make sense of phenomena and think scientifically. Well, they are not exactly, while the term cross-cutting concept is relatively recent, the idea has been around for some time. What existed prior to the cross-cutting concepts were part of the next generation science standards here in the United States, which are about 10 years old since they've been implemented, although different states were implementing them over the past 10 years or adapting them in some sort of way. But prior to that, the United States was using something called the National Science Education Standard, which is the rightmost column in terms of what the big ideas were or the unifying concepts. AAAS had something called Common Themes, which was somewhat similar and somewhat different. to the standards unifying concepts. And then the College Board was also had their unifying concepts somewhat similar, but somewhat different than the other two organizations with their big ideas or unifying concepts. And so in around 2011, 2012, and by 2013, the next generation science standards were put forth. And this third strand, that third strand of rope was the cross-cutting concepts. And these cross-cutting concepts are patterns, and these are ideas that are that cut across or are universal in all domains of science, but also can cut across to other content areas that students, K-12 students, are often learning about or take as their subject matter in secondary or middle grades or even early grades as well. So patterns is one, cause and effect is another, the second, scale, proportion, and quantity is a third, systems and system models is a fourth, energy and matter, and structure and function, and the last is stability and change. And they're often presented in that sequence in terms of how they're usually listed in academic articles or in the standards themselves. And depending on, you may get people thinking, well, this is the order in which they should be introduced to students, or this is the order in complexity in terms of higher level or the lower level thinking to higher ability thinking. And educators, science educators might argue that they're all equal and can be all of equal difficulty to understand or incorporate, but they're all equally important. What some states did, including my home state, Pennsylvania, was actually when we adopted new standards last year, was to actually add an eighth cross-cutting concept of sustainability. And so here we'll be implementing that as well. So why are they so important in planning and designing science lessons and in teaching science? And one of the goals in science education, in teaching science, is to help our students to think more like experts, experienced professional working scientists, and to bring them out of that novice level where they may be students who are thinking kind of very topically and in the moment superficially about concepts, scientific concepts, and to bring them to that higher level and to think like professionals do, or at least simulate those practices and the critical thinking that professional scientists may do. And we might ask ourselves, well, what can we give our teachers as a tool to develop those themes for their science lessons and actually help with the delivery of the content and improve and guide and focus the storyline of their teaching? And so if we give students that expert-like conceptual framework to organize their ideas around, and that's how the cross-cutting concepts are viewed. They are that framework to organize ideas and to organize thinking, regardless of the scientific content that teachers are expected to teach over the course of the K-12 education science standards. So how do we enable our students to think and be more like experts and practicing scientists? Well, in a game of chess, experts are using a conceptual framework. They're kind of thinking toward the big picture and towards the destination. Much like an expert master chess player who is thinking 5 to 10 moves, not just their moves, but your moves as well, and where your potential moves. And meanwhile, novices, and after how many years of trying to play chess, I'm still very much a novice and thinking in the moment in terms of what I can move and how I can move. And so by integrating the cross-cutting concepts into a lesson, this tool can help students make sense of that new content and to tackle problems in a new and integrative as well as innovative way. They can allow students to be more flexible. It also allows the teacher to be to exhibit more flexibility and creativity with their lessons when they have that theme around which they can design their lessons and ways they can get their students to think about critically scientific concepts to bring them to better conceptual models of their understanding. And so what do we need to do as teachers, and as teachers of pre-service teachers, students who are going to become practicing professional teachers? It's also to get them familiar with this, this tool of the cross-cutting concepts. And one of the ways we can do that is to encourage and demonstrate by purposefully asking questions, using the language that are structured with the particular cross-cutting concept that we are using to frame our lesson. And if we can do that, then this helps getting students focused on the key parts of an investigation or on the phenomena itself. And those kinds of questions, very specifically where it's really a matter of changing the way we're thinking about how we're teaching and the words we are using when we are teaching. For instance, if we're interested in, if our lesson theme or the cross-cutting concept is cause and effect, we might phrase questions this way as well. Or if it's about patterns, we would specifically use that word patterns in our questioning. We would use the word system or stability, depending on if we're focused on system and system models, or if we're interested in using the cross-cutting concept of stability and change, or if we're using scale, proportion, and quantity, we would use those words very specifically, very directed with the questions we can ask or the questions that we have provide students and some sort of graphic organizer that we can provide them. And similarly, if we want our students to also be constantly be thinking about that cross-cutting concept, that we provide them sentence starters or sentence stems, and that we model this with answering questions using those specific terms of the cross-cutting concept. And that'll encourage our students to apply their reasoning and their responses with that cross-cutting concept in mind. So it's kind of omnipresent throughout the lesson. We're seeing it in multiple ways, where they can answer the question about the cause and effect and provide evidence of what that was. Again, scale, proportion, and quantity, patterns, and at the same time, they also have to provide evidence and their reasoning, what their reasoning is, that they can make an inference about that. So we're asking them to explain their responses and also incorporate the process skills, scientific process skills as well. So structure and function. So they're asking and answering. So as a teacher, we're asking questions using these terms, and we're providing students the opportunity to answer using the same language so that it's always there. In order to get our pre-service to improve their understanding of the cross-cutting concepts and to work their way to using them, utilizing them, and incorporating them in the lessons that they develop, that they create, and also teach, it's important for us as teachers and as teachers of pre-service teachers to model and practice this and to give our students plenty of exposure regularly and kind of deconstruct what just happened. So I may teach a lesson, model a lesson, and then we talk about what all the different aspects of pedagogy, of course, but also about that cross-cutting concept. So an activity typical might do is something called 50 balls of clay, which is to model the Earth-Moon system in making sure that things are both of size and distance proportionally correct. So while the skill is to understand the use of models and modeling and the iterative process of going of a predictive model to an actual model through an investigation, the lesson can also be framed with a cross-cutting concept, and whether students see it as a system or a system model, or they're seeing it as scale, proportion, and quantity. Well, to the individual student, especially if they're planning on teaching similar, they may frame it in a different way. So it's just the individual student who may see the lesson, of course, as the person who's teaching it, they have their own ideas about how it should be delivered, and they may tend to focus on the system, or they can tend to focus on the scale, proportion, and quantity. So there's really, depending on the cross-cutting concept, that's totally fine. It's up to the individual teacher's choice. It's not just participating in activities and model lessons, but it's also important to be able to read a practitioner article and determine how the lesson was framed. So giving them different samples, practitioner articles, and trying to figure out, well, what are all the skills involved that students are engaged with that make them, that allows them to practice and be engaged in the skills of science and also learn the content as they're doing it. But how is the whole investigation framed? Is it systems or system models? Is it stability and change? Is it cause and effect? And to have that discussion and debate about the cross-cutting concept and how they might frame it if they were doing this investigation, and to allow them to some practice with framing questions and rewriting part of an activity given their choice or how they frame that particular activity. And again, modeling lessons about different things like Mars and Martian land features and how they compare to Earth, and making the case for water on Mars, really about different kinds of pedagogy and teaching and using multiple modes and a differentiated lesson, and also incorporating Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences. So there may be different reasons for doing the lesson and getting students to focus on those different aspects of pedagogy, but the lesson is still taught with a theme of a cross-cutting concept, and also having that discussion. And so different examples that are used to reinforce this idea of the cross-cutting concept and get students, pre-service teachers and students themselves used to experiencing and thinking about a lesson or an investigation, whether it's patterns with a particular crime scene and how different things reacted with testing for materials, or understanding the structure and function of DNA, or the scale, proportion, and quantity of water, the amount of water on our planet, and the cause and effect of how the chemical composition and gas content and other physical properties of magma or lava affect a volcanic eruption. So they're getting it in multiple different ways, and to get practice with thinking like that. And when students have their reflections, both throughout the semester or when they're writing lesson plans, to kind of think about specifically how they were able to integrate the cross-cutting concept, that's important too, for them to express that, how it changed their lesson, how the lesson evolved with the use of this new tool. And so just a few examples of student reflective pieces here in designing lessons, and also them reflecting on how the use of the cross-cutting concept aided them in framing their lesson and giving them a lens to teach that. So, well, that's all great and good, but there is actually very limited scholarship on the impact of the cross-cutting concepts on student learning outcomes in science, and that goes to any age, all the way down to our youngest learners who need to, our pre-K and K first graders, or how teachers are actually using and implementing them, and how their teaching may have changed. There's a fair amount of informative articles and recommended uses of cross-cutting concepts, but if we have this tool or new tool, say for example, we want to use that tool, we want to examine the tool's efficacy and effectiveness, and we want to see, well, how does it impact student learning outcomes and student success? How does teaching change? How does teaching science change with the use of this tool? And so plans for myself, I think this is a ripe area for scholarship. And for myself, my colleagues and I here at Westchester University received a large grant from the National Science Foundation here to promote teaching residency programs, students with STEM backgrounds to achieve their master's in degree, and also teaching certification, and also follow them for the first several years to promote teacher leadership and intense professional development with teacher leadership and teaching effectiveness, and providing them research internships and a great deal of lesson study as well. And so this gives me an opportunity to work with these this cohort for the next, or these cohorts, excuse me, for the next several years, which will include science teachers. It'll also include math teachers, as well as a population sample to potentially use to study in terms of a case study with the teachers, or collecting qualitative data from student artifacts from the teachers and analyzing those as it pertains to the improvement, or potentially, at least we'll just say, the impact of the cross-cutting concept on learning. And my home state, has new science standards that were adopted last year and need to be fully implemented in the next 2 years. They were adapted from the next generation science standards. And so anticipated, well, actually already begun, our professional development webinars and in-person training with practicing teachers and administrators about how to implement these, and how to work with practicing teachers so that they're implementing them and thinking about that theme, that frame, that lens to teach science using this new tool, which wasn't there before, and what impact it may have on their teaching and also on those student learning outcomes. Is there an improvement? Is there a change in student thinking and reasoning? So that makes me happy, because I get to teach and work with teachers and pre-service teachers and students. And I kind of asked the question, if they exist to support student learning and to help teachers design and teach lessons, we should be using that tool, because they can develop greater insight into scientific phenomena, and the lessons become better. Students are actually engaged in and practicing the skills of science, and their sense of wonder is enhanced. And I think maybe at the core, and maybe the biggest and most existential, it supports science literacy and the very nature of doing science. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time this morning, or actually your this afternoon. So, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you.